Well, hello friends. Welcome to the SerenityOS update for July 2021. It's now 2 months since I started working full-time on the project, and after some initial confusion, it's starting to feel basically normal. And something new I've been doing this month is weekly live streams. So every Friday at 4 p.m. Swedish time, I've been doing SerenityOS office hours, which is a 2-hour stream here on YouTube, completely driven by audience questions. And it's been super fun to interact with you guys live and talk about everything that comes up randomly. And I think we're going to keep doing this format as long as it's fun and interesting for people. And before we begin today, I do have to mention that my work on this project is funded by viewers and fans of the system. So if you would like to help me continue doing this, you can support me on GitHub sponsors, Patreon, or PayPal, and you can find links to those in the video description. And of course, a huge thank you to everybody who's already supporting me. So let's talk about July. After taking a little bit of a breather last month, we are now back over 20 pull requests being merged every day. And in July, we had over 2,100 commits from over 100 people, making it our busiest month to date. And if we continue this way, I'm going to have to start doing weekly SerenityOS updates pretty soon. Anyway, let's take a look around the system. All right, so the first thing I want to show you today is our new workspaces support. So like many other systems, Serenity now supports multiple workspaces or virtual desktops, if you will. And you can switch between the workspaces by using Control-Alt-Left and Control-Alt-Right. And you can also click down here on the workspace picker applet. And if you want more than 2 of these, which is what I have set up, you can just go in the display settings workspaces and configure as many of these as you like, lay them out in a grid like this, and now you have 6 of them, for example. And then you can switch with Control-Alt arrow keys. And the workspaces were implemented by Tom, and this chooser switcher applet thing was made by Peter. So thank you, Tom and Peter, for these cool features. And nearby down here, actually, we have a new thing as well, the Show Desktop button. So if you have a bunch of apps open and you want to quickly show the desktop, you can now click that thing, minimizes everything that's up, you click it again, brings everybody back. And this feature was added by Garrett, so thank you, Garrett. And actually on the other side of the screen, we also now have a thing where if you click in the very bottom left of the screen, previously you couldn't hit the button if you would position the cursor at the very bottom left, but that was pretty silly. So thanks to the work of Andreas, we now nudge the cursor so that you actually hit the button every time if you click in the bottom left corner, making it slightly easier to hit the start menu button without getting annoyed. So thank you, Andreas, for working on that. And in window management stuff, we also have a new pin window option, which is sort of the always on top mode. So if I have an always on top or pinned system monitor, then I can move this text editor underneath here and it doesn't pop over the system monitor just as you would expect. So very nice little feature added by Andreas, I think. So thank you, Andreas, for working on that. And if we bring up File Manager, we can see some stuff here. So one thing I did, for example, was that if you show dot files in the File Manager, they now show up as semi-transparent icons instead of just looking like everything else. And dot files also now show up in the tree view here. Nice little thing. And we also have a new rename action in the menus, and I particularly like this icon, actually. It's a little text box with an I-beam cursor. It's a very, very nice icon. And the rename action was added by Karol, so thank you, Karol. And actually, while we had the display settings up here, I added this accent color to the top of the active tab in tab widgets. I felt that it was sometimes not visually clear enough which tab was active, and a little bit of accent color here really emphasizes the currently active tab nicely, I think. And obviously it follows the current theme color, so if you switch to theme, it uses an appropriate accent color for your theme. But let's stay with the default. So a new application that we have this month is the Mail application. And oh, I have no server configured. Well, not a problem. We will go into another new application from this month, the Settings application. So in Settings, you can now find the different system and application settings that we have exposed so far. Currently, we have display, keyboard, mail, and mouse, and we need to configure the mail settings in order to use the mail application. So I'll just set this up here. Let's connect to my alter ego Gmail account, awkwardclang@gmail.com, and let's bring mail back up. And let's see if I can remember my password. I could. All right, so as you can see, this is an account I created earlier today. And the mail application here was made by Luke, and it builds on top of libimap, which Kyle started doing, and then Linus and Luke have worked on as well. So team effort, getting mail up and running, and very, very cool. And the mail message content that you see rendered here is using libweb, of course, since it's HTML content. And, we're not doing a perfect job, but it's a work in progress, like everything else. But at least, you get the basic idea of what the message here is. And I see that we have some rendering glitches here. Looks like we need to fix some parent index in the mailbox tree model, probably. But let's ignore that right now. But thank you, Luke, and everybody for working on email. And the settings app is something I've been working on. I've also done a user interface facelift here for the mouse settings. So I think it turned out really, really good. Let's look at something else. So the assistant, right, assistant. So assistant now has a file system search, which was implemented by Spencer. So I can now start typing here, and it actually searches in the file system. And it is really, really fast, which is nice. I did a whole bunch of performance work on it, profiling, iterating on it, and eliminating bottlenecks. So it has become really, really fast at finding stuff. Now, obviously, we're going to have to keep crunching on it and improving it as the system grows in complexity. But I'm really happy with the assistant so far. And another thing that was added for assistant is file locking support. So Peter was annoyed that you could bring up more than one assistant. So he added file locking to the system, and assistant can now make sure that there's only one instance of it running. So that's pretty cool. And now I'd like to pass the ball to Linus, who's going to talk a bit about JavaScript.
All right, so let's look at the lib.js changes of July. First off, some numbers. If you didn't watch the last month's video, we started doing test 262 runs on each CI run. So we're continuously improving our test 262 score. Started the month with about 53% of all tests passing and are now up to 60.8. So it's slowing down slightly, but still tons and tons of small correctness improvements, adding missing features and all that. One big part of that was at the beginning of the month, a rewrite of our object implementation. So the month might sound a bit extreme, but what we had turned out to be not quite correct in a couple of edge cases, and it was increasingly complicated to get that right. So Eden and I just rewrote a bunch of the internals to get closer to the spec. It made things a little bit slower, but a lot more correct. So we got about 8% of passing tests from that alone. So it was definitely worth it. And it also enabled a bunch of other things. Like Andreas completed the arguments object implementation, which is like hooking into that, overwriting some object internal methods. So that was definitely a good change. Andreas also worked on more correctness fixes for function calls and references, so making good improvements on that front. And then Eden also went ahead and removed a bunch of non-standard helpers that we had still around and not needed anymore, as well as our native property implementation, which was in some ways abused, which should have been accessor properties. So that also helped a lot with correctness in that way. And then we started another big project, which is the temporal proposal, which is currently stage 3 and being implemented by a bunch of larger browsers as well. So Eden and I got currently the plain date, plain time, plain date time, duration instant, time zone, and calendar, which I can demo. So let's have a look at that. So there's a top level object called temporal, which holds all the constructors, and a special one called temporal.now, which has a couple of helpers like .instant, which gives you a current instant of nanoseconds since the epoch time, or we could also look at the time zone, which is UTC because Serenity doesn't have any others implemented yet. But that's still work in progress, so we're about 1/3 through all the functions, still working on that. But we got a couple, and it's really fun because the spec is still evolving, so we're still looking at changes they are making and then adapting our implementation accordingly. So it's really cool to see that side of the ECMAScript development process. Let's see, can also do a plain time, which you can then pass some values. And there's also pretty printing enabled in the REPL, so you can see that's like printed hours, minutes, seconds, milliseconds, and so on. So you get good introspection of these objects in the REPL as well. Moving on, Handy did some improvements on scoping and function hoisting fixes. So that was again in response to test 262. Also David did some correctness fixes for the array prototype, especially around indexes and the internal number types we were using, where you wouldn't really notice any issues with lower array indexes, but once you get to large numbers, it would sometimes behave strangely or straight up don't work. So that's improved now. Also got Luke and Eden working on typed array some more, so we got a bunch of more of the typed array prototype functions that you already might know from regular arrays. So we got reverse, copy within, fill, includes, index of, reduce, map, sort, all of that. So making good progress on that. We got a bunch of fixes for the regular expression implementation this month. So Tim worked a lot on that, especially one very important feature, which is splitting by regular expression. So say you got a string like a.b, c.d, and you want to split that by either comma or dot, and you could say dot split and provide a regular expression like this, and then you got an array. So that was done by Tim. Also did a bunch of just correctness fixes and refactoring for that, and also the has indices stage 3 proposal. So good work on that. Tim also started working on atomics. So that's atomics is a top-level object with some static functions like add, and sub, XOR, all that. So you can make a tabbed array. T equals new let's take a uint 8 array of 5 elements. And now we can atomics.store. So we give it an array, an index, and some value. And then we can see that it updated the value at index 0. And then we can say atomics.add. Again, that same array, that same index, and a value. And it still returns 42 because that's the old value. But if we inspect that array, we can see that it indeed updated. So that still needs some more work, so it's not complete, but a really good start on that. Another thing Ali did was some improvements for the parser, especially around identifiers and making sure we allow some things like let in certain contexts and binding patterns. So good work on that. Same with David. He also did parser changes, some fixes for the dis value, some strict mat fixes. So just general stuff that helps us improving correctness. And last but not least, a ton of work by Tim again on UTF-16. So currently the strings in libjs were all UTF-8. Internally they still are, but that's an issue when you have certain strings that are not ASCII. Especially lengths were not reported correctly. And he made all that happen by adding a new library called libunicode. So that's parsing some text files from the Unicode specification and generating code for that. So that we can have things like mapping from Unicode uppercase to lowercase characters, which I can demo actually. So I can take that from the German key map, which has a lowercase umlaut, and put that in a string. If I say to uppercase on that, then we get a uppercase character, and the same if I do. So we got now upper, and if I do upper dot to lowercase, then we get that same lowercase character again. So that's really good. Quite recent addition. Also did that for regular expressions. So in together with Ali, those are now working with UTF-16 strings across the board. So that's really great. Yeah, that's it. Back to Andreas.
Well, thank you, Linus. Now let's look at some other stuff in the system here. So if we bring up Hack Studio, for example, and I want to show you some new integrations we have. So if you have GML, for example, we now support GML editing in Hack Studio. So let me add a simple layout here, and maybe I want to have a GUI button, and I can now open the GML preview pane down here and see my UI take shape as I type. Okie dokie. And maybe I want to have more buttons. You get the idea. So this is something that Connor has been working on. Connor has been doing a lot of interesting stuff on Hack Studio, and there's more to come. So lots to look forward to there. When it comes to the C++ support, I know Itamar has been working on a bunch of stuff. One thing I particularly like is this new support for parameter suggestions. So if I type here like int fd open and oh, I thought I could do that. fopen then. And then I can get a suggestion here for the parameters that I need to provide for fopen. Why doesn't it know about open? Oh, maybe because I didn't have UniSTD. Let's try that. Could not get parameter hint. Okay, well, it seems like maybe it needs to learn about open somehow. Oh, no, there it is. Okay, so it was in for control.h. That was the issue. So that's my bad for not including the header. Very cool work by Itamar. So the way you bring this up is you just press Control P, and it brings up this parameter suggestions, basically. Super handy. And it should work with anything that the parser can see in the current context. So thank you, Itamar, for working on that, and Connor for working on GML stuff. Super, super cool. And let's look at some command line utilities maybe. So a new program we have this month is pgrep from Aziz. So I can now pgrep for file manager, for example, and this will be the desktop file manager instance. We have less now. So if I have something that produces a lot of output, I can pipe it to less, and less was added by Peter. And then some other folks worked on it as well. And we used to have only more, where you couldn't go back up. So now we have less, which is much, much nicer. So thank you, Peter, for adding that. Oh, and Aziz made something else, by the way. He also did shot-r for grabbing screenshots with a rectangle. So you can grab the nephew head here, kluk, and then it gives me a screenshot with only that region that I selected. There we go. Pretty cool. So that's shot-r for rectangle screenshot. Another little command line thing is we now have ls-R for recursive listings. It's one of those things that I was surprised that we didn't have it already, but indeed we didn't. So this was added by Ariel. Thank you, Ariel, for adding that. And if we look at maybe Pixel Paint. So I've been doing a bunch of work on reducing the amount of screen updates that we do in Pixel Paint. And in order to do that, I was using this new debugging mechanism that I added. So it's Windows Server Control -F1, and this is going to make the screen flicker quite a bit. So if you don't like flickering, don't look at this for the next 30 seconds. So when this option is enabled, you can see that we produce a yellow rectangle or a green rectangle if there's alpha transparency whenever we are about to update the screen somewhere. And as you can see when I'm drawing here in Pixel Paint, we're making very, very small updates. There's only a little bit of yellow flickering right under the cursor, and also the little thumbnail here updates. And I spent a bunch of time on minimizing the amount of repainting that we do. We used to flicker the whole window yellow, and this debug mode has been immensely helpful for that. And it also makes Pixel Paint feel really fluid to use, which, I mean, obviously Pixel Paint needs a lot more work before it's really useful, but having all of the debugging tools and instrumentation tools to be able to investigate this type of stuff already available is really cool, I think. Another person who worked on Pixel Paint was Marcus, who did some stuff with layers. So now if we have multiple layers here, and I will paint something on that layer, and we now have options like merge visible layers, flatten the whole image, and I think Marcus also made the layer list here scrollable. So if we make a whole bunch of layers, so that we have to scroll the list of layers, there's now a scroll bar instead of the list just getting cut off, which is what used to happen before. So thank you very much, Marcus, for working on that. And a subtle thing that Marcus also did, by the way, is that now if I'm using the brush tool and I click down, the initial mouse down event now produces color already. Previously, you had to click down and then drag the mouse before you would actually see something, but now color shows up right away. It's a very subtle thing, but really nice of Marcus to notice that and fix it. So that's Pixel Paint. And speaking of little things, a little thing that I really like is something that Max did, which was when we run the profiler on something, so say that I just profile browser startup, it now produces a file with the extension .profile. We used to use the PID as the extension, but now because we have a .profile as the extension, we can associate that with the profile viewer, so you can now double click on profiles immediately after creating them. It's a little thing, but it's so much nicer that I don't have to type out a command to open the profile. I can just double click on it. So thank you, Max, for doing that. And stuff that's hard to show, but it's really awesome is we have a bunch of performance improvements for the PNG encoder. So Aziz worked on that, removing a bunch of memory allocation and pointless churn, speeding up PNG encoding. And I worked on a new physical memory allocator for the kernel. So we now use a binary buddy allocator, which has much nicer complexity than the old one, which was very naive. And we also have done a whole bunch of work on low memory conditions in the kernel. So Brian has been doing a ton of stuff, converting the kernel to using more friendly data structures like intrusive lists, and trying to get rid of vectors and allocations in the kernel. And I've been helping a little bit with that as well, but Brian has been doing amazing work on it. And it's a huge task to get our kernel to the point where it can really survive a proper out-of-memory situation. But step by step, we're getting there. So that's something that is really cool. And a random little thing that I forgot to show you is that our 3D file viewer or model viewer now has this, you can click and drag to get a little bit of mouse control over the object you're looking at. So it's just a little thing, but I remember the first time I tried this app and I couldn't do this and it felt so wrong. So this was done by Noah, I think. So thank you, Noah, for making it mouse accessible. Very, very cool. And yeah, I think those were all the things I wanted to talk about here. But now I'm going to let Linus talk about the browser.
Okay, so let's look at the browser and libweb changes for July. So first of all, we got Sam, who's been working hard all month on the new CSS parser. So in case you're not familiar, we got a old ad hoc legacy CSS parser that breaks in various ways and is not really that great. And then Steeler7 made a new spec compliant parser a while ago, but that was never really finished and integrated. So Sam has done countless improvements on that new parser, fixes, making things work. And the final PR for replacing that old parser with the new one is currently ongoing. So it's not 100% there yet, but very good progress on the new CSS parser, and that will unlock like a bunch of new websites to work and advanced features like add import and things like that. So really good work by Sam. That's a glitch. Some work by Ali on WebAssembly. So he did the module constructor and instance constructor, which you can then use from JavaScript to interface with WebAssembly. Some work by Tobias on various CSS features. So first of all, he worked a lot on lists. For example, you can see here Roman literals, which is just an ordered list, and then it automatically adds these Roman literals to it. So that's really cool. A bunch of work by Luke on the DOM and wrapper generator. working on various Node APIs. Something performance related. So Max and Gunnar worked on the HTML tokenizer and tokens. So there's a bunch of performance and memory improvements on that front, making them smaller and really efficient. But I think it was removing string builders from the internal implementation, and that reduces malloc traffic. So really good work on that. Okay, so we also got support for the CSS opacity property, which you can see on this demo site. So that was added by Igor. Really nice work, quite common across the web. Just changing the opacity of some element. Has a bit of a flicker issue, but I'm sure that can be fixed. Some more work by Tobias. He added the justify content property in CSS for flexblocks. So as you can see, on the start, on the end, center, and some spacing around it. So that works really good. Flexbox support still needs more work, but this is a nice step forward. He also did work on CSS shadows. So we got the box shadow property. As you can see, offsets into various directions, colors with opacity, and then he also added blurring for shadows. So that's based on a Gauss filter and works quite nicely. I really like that. And finally, he also worked on text decoration lines. So for underline, overline, which I don't think has a demo here, but so that's really nice work. And back to Andreas.
And then one last thing. So something that you probably didn't notice, but I've been doing this demo on x86 64. So, ta-da! As you can see, the system has been successfully ported to 64-bit, thanks to the very hard work of Gunnar Beutner. So thank you very much, Gunnar, for all of your awesome work on this. And it's really, really cool. So as you can see, it just kind of works. Doesn't look or feel any different. And that's awesome. So I think that's everything that I had to show you today. With the project moving so fast, it gets harder and harder to cover everything that goes on, but I hope you could get a feel for where we are right now. And I want to thank everybody who participated in the project in July. Everybody's been doing absolutely amazing work, and it's super fun to be around all the good energy. And I also want to thank you, the viewer, for checking in and staying up to date with the project. If you want to come chat with us, do join our Discord server. There's a link to that in the video description. And that's it. So I will see you all next time. Bye.